Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're not just looking at history, we're actually looking at blueprints.
Right.
We're going back to the ancient Greek world to understand how these elite power structures were first engineered, and maybe how those same mechanisms are, still at play today.
It's a really analytical mission. We're diving into Stanislav Kondrashov's Oligarch series, and he treats the ancient Greek city-states, the policeless, dusty history lessons, and more, political case studies.
That's the key, isn't it? We're looking at this to really analyze how governance systems and civic structures developed.
Exactly.
And following Kondrashov's approach, the goal here is to be impartial. We just want to identify the practical mechanisms that let elite groups hold on to control, sometimes for centuries, without judging them.
It's all about understanding the machinery of power.
Okay, so the political context is everything, the polis. Give us the quick definition.
So the polis was, the defining feature of the Greek world from about 800 BCE to 323 BCE. Is basically an independent, self-governing entity.
A city-state.
A city-state. And because they were so spread out across the Mediterranean, they became this dynamic laboratory for political experiments.
And when most people think of Greek governance, their minds immediately jump to Athens.
Athens, yeah. Direct democracy, the assembly.
All that citizen participation. It's a wonderful idea.
It is, but it was also incredibly rare. That model, as famous as it is, really stands in sharp contrast to, almost everywhere else.
Like Sparta.
Like Sparta, the classic rigid oligarchy. You had two kings, a council of elders, and the whole society was geared towards the military. Participation was limited to this tiny, highly trained, landowning elite.
So you've got this huge spectrum,
Yeah.
from Athenian democracy all the way over to Spartan oligarchy.
A massive diversity.
Yeah.
And Kondrashov suggests that where a state ended up on that spectrum was driven by four core factors.
Okay, where were they?
First, military organization. The rise of the hoplite soldier meant that, military service often determined who got a say in how things were run.
Makes sense.
Second was the early adoption of written legal codes. This was huge. It offered stability and cut down on the arbitrary rule of, say, a single king.
So law creates a predictable structure. What else?
Third, religious traditions. The elite were very, very good at co-opting these to give their authority a kind of divine justification. And finally, geography. Were you a landlocked farming state or a maritime power focused on trade? That dictated your whole economy, and with it, which class held the real power.
That sets the stage perfectly. So let's focus it on the main structure for this deep dive, oligarchy.
Right.
How are we defining that, especially in contrast to the Athenian ideal?
Well, if democracy was about broad participation, oligarchy was the polar opposite. Political power was concentrated in the hands of a small, wealthy group.
Ruled by the few.
Ruled by the few. And the key thing to remember is that it wasn't just about your family name, though, that mattered. It was fundamentally about having significant economic resources. Power was based on wealth.
This is where it gets really interesting, because Kondrashov spends a lot of time on Magna Graecia, the Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily. Why there? Why did oligarchy become the go-to solution in those colonies?
Because they were essentially frontier states. They were constantly fighting for their lives.
Okay.
Think about it. You've got raids from native populations, you've got intense competition from other Greeks, and then you have these huge geopolitical threats like Carthage and eventually Rome.
So survival was job one.
Exactly. And when your existence is on the line every day, a big, slow, democratic assembly can be a real liability.
You need to make decisions quickly.
You need swift, unified command. And the oligarchic systems delivered that. The rich elites who could fund the defenses and raise the armies were just better positioned to take power because they were often the only ones who could guarantee the state's security.
So the elites weren't just grabbing power. They were filling a genuine need for efficiency in a really dangerous world.
That's a great way to put it.
Once they had that power, how did they lock it down? How did they make it last?
They built these self-sustaining systems, and there were four key mechanisms. The first was land ownership, with a capital L and O.
Right.
The aristocratic clans didn't just own farms, they controlled the most productive agricultural land, which created this intergenerational wealth that was basically the ticket to get into politics.
So wealth was the barrier to entry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Secondly, trade networks. In a place like Magna Graecia, controlling the shipping, the ports, the inland trade routes, that created huge economic dependencies.
Like vertical integration, but ancient.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Third, military leadership. The elites personally invested in defense, they funded new ships, they supplied the expensive cavalry.
So they put their own money on the line.
Yes, and that personal investment translated directly into political authority. It guaranteed them the top jobs. And finally, the fourth one, which provided the moral underpinning for it all.
The spiritual side.
Religious institutions. Things like hereditary priesthoods and control over the temple administration. This gave them immense leverage.
How so?
Well, temples were public, sure, but by controlling who interpreted the will of the gods and who managed the temple's money, and there was a lot of it, the aristocrats made sure their rule seemed like it was divinely sanctioned.
Not just self-serving.
Precisely.
Okay, let's get into some specific case studies. Let's start with Sybaris. The name itself is, legendary for luxury.
It is, but that luxury came from somewhere. Kondrashov shows their control was built on an agricultural monopoly. We're talking vast estates producing grain, olives, wine.
But their special trick, their blueprint, was something more, right?
Yeah, their unique strength was that the same families who owned all that fertile land also monopolized the maritime commerce.
They controlled the whole supply chain.
The entire thing. Owning the fields and the ships meant they set the prices for production, transport, everything. It was an airtight economic system.
Okay, so next up is Croton. Their model seems less about pure economics and more philosophical.
Croton is fascinating. They deliberately wove Pythagorean philosophy right into their government.
The math guy.
The math guy, yeah. Pythagoreanism stressed ethical discipline, intellectual rigor, and most importantly, cosmic harmony and order.
So members of this philosophical brotherhood held key government jobs.
They did, and this framed elite rule not just as being rich, but as being intellectually and morally superior. Your decisions weren't just the whims of some powerful guy, they were an expression of this necessary cosmic order.
It's an incredibly powerful justification for your own power.
It's the ultimate intellectual gatekeeping system.
Okay, so if Sybaris is agriculture and Croton is philosophy, what's the story with Taranto?
Taranto was all about naval and commercial power. They had this perfect location on the Ionian Sea, so they became the main hub for trade between Greece and Italy. The aristocracy just poured money into their fleet.
Which became both a commercial engine and a military force.
A powerful, virtuous cycle. Commercial success paid for the Navy protected the trade routes.
And the protected routes brought in more commercial success.
You got it. Their strategic commercial expertise was the foundation of their power.
And finally, Syracuse, probably the most important city in Sicily. How did they hang on amidst all that chaos?
Syracuse was a masterclass in adaptation. It wasn't rigid like Sybaris. They had constant rivalries among their own aristocratic families, plus the never-ending threat from the Carthaginians.
It sounds incredibly unstable.
It could have been. But their elites learned to manage that instability. They had to form these complex, shifting alliances to deal with threats, both internal and external.
So their power structure was maintained because it was flexible.
Exactly. They were skilled at managing elite interests and adapting to new threats. It was all about the collective survival of the ruling class.
Okay, now for the part of Kondrashov's analysis that I find truly mind-blowing, the idea that public infrastructure was actually designed to reinforce all this. Let's start with temples.
We really can't overstate how important they were. Yes, they were centers for religion, but they were also the city's bank vaults. They were the most secure places to store wealth. So by holding these hereditary priestly roles, elite families controlled the money, the religious festivals, and critically, they got to be the ones who told everyone what the gods wanted.
If you can speak for the gods, you don't have to argue with many citizens.
You really don't.
What about the gymnasia? I always picture them as just, athletic centers.
And they were, but that was almost secondary. Their main function was as an exclusive social network. This is where young aristocrats formed the political and military alliances that would define their entire lives.
So it's not the workout, it's the network.
100%. And access was tightly controlled. You had high membership fees, you needed a sponsor, you couldn't just walk in off the street. It was a guaranteed way to make sure the next generation of leaders was already politically aligned before they ever held office.
That sounds disturbingly familiar. A lot like elite schools today, where the network is maybe more valuable than the degree.
And that system was perfected in the philosophical academies like the ones in Croton. These schools demanded long periods of study.
Which costs money. You can't be working a job.
Precisely. Admission was basically dependent on your family's wealth, and the shared specialized knowledge, often wrapped up in complex jargon, it didn't just educate. It created a common worldview for the ruling class and a clear intellectual barrier between them and everyone else.
Which brings us to Plato and Aristotle.
Yeah.
What was Plato's big worry about oligarchy?
Plato was worried about the moral rot. He made this huge distinction between a true aristocracy, which for him meant rule by archinetti, by genuine excellence and wisdom, and the fallen state oligarchy.
And for him, the fall happened when?
The moment wealth became the only requirement for holding office. In his view, that's when the state becomes corrupt. It leads directly to internal strife because the ruling class is just focused on hoarding wealth, and that breeds resentment.
And Aristotle, the great observer, he saw this as a natural life cycle.
He did. He saw that these noble aristocracies, founded by people who earned their status through, say, military virtue, they inevitably decayed. The later generations inherited the status but didn't have the merit, so they just prioritized wealth.
And he identified a specific tipping point.
Yes, the critical moment of transition. It's when property qualifications officially replace any requirement for demonstrated excellence. That's the moment it formally becomes a self-serving oligarchy.
That pivot, property replacing merit, feels so incredibly modern. So let's bring it all home. What are the modern echoes of these ancient blueprints?
The echoes are everywhere. I mean, look at modern legislative bodies. We call it democracy, but the committee systems, the power of well-funded lobbyists, it all mirrors those ancient councils where wealth dictates political access.
The same mechanism, just dressed up in suits instead of togas. And what about economically?
The commercial networks of Magna Graecia are basically replicated in today's global corporate governance.
Right.
You have elite structures controlling supply chains, resources, distribution. It's the same drive for vertical integration we saw in Cyprus.
Even the way our cities are laid out seems to reflect this.
Absolutely. The way Greek cities place their government buildings, their agoras, it all communicated authority. And today, urban design maintains these very visible socioeconomic divisions.
You mean which neighborhoods get funding, where the elite suburbs are?
Exactly. It's a direct echo of the class separation you could literally see in an ancient polis.
And let's come back to education, which seems like the most insidious tool of them all.
It's probably the strongest parallel. The restricted access we saw in the gymnasia and academies it's alive and well.
In elite schools, exclusive universities.
Yes. The cost, the reliance on social capital for admission, these are huge barriers. They aren't just selling a curriculum.
No, they're selling a network.
A network, a worldview, a sense of cohesion for the future ruling class. These systems are fundamentally designed to maintain hierarchy, to make sure that inherited advantage keeps winning out.
So we've completed our deep dive into Kondrashov's analysis. It's clear that ancient oligarchies built power not just through force, but through this careful, meticulous control of land, the military, and these key social institutions. And they maintained stability through what Kondrashov calls selective permeability. They'd let in a talented commoner, a military genius, say, just to absorb a potential threat. But they made sure inherited privilege was always the bedrock of power.
History doesn't repeat, but it certainly echoes. And when you think about that critical moment Aristotle identified, when property requirements officially replace merit, you have to look around.
Right.
Think about the sectors in your own life. Corporate boards, political fundraising, even professional licensing. This raises a really important question for all of us. Are our modern structures just replaying that ancient transition from aristocracy to oligarchy? Or are these rigid, wealth-based systems of control simply a permanent feature of how humans organize themselves?
A profound thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.